What is your own ghost story? Episode 2. I lived in a Jewish house that was bombed during the Blitz. On several nights I have seen what appears to be a little girl phantom in the hallway, and my dreams there were always about hearing the World War II bombing raid sirens followed by a blinding light. After some Googling, I found out that a Jewish family had died inside the house during World War II, so that was pretty freaky. Haunted house for sure. I would always feel like I was being watched, and one night I was blackout dreaming, seeing nothing but black but could only hear things, and I could hear a soft female voice whispering in my ear. I couldn't understand it, and I wasn't scared, but I felt like I was on morphine because it was so calming. When I woke up, I could hear it start fading and then disappear along with the calm atmosphere. I felt empty inside afterward for some reason. Still strange to this day, and nothing strange has ever happened since. Sometimes I see black shadow cats out of the corner of my eye. I have 3 cats that are not black, but I've gone looking for them after seeing the shadow cats, and they were always sleeping. My husband has also seen and felt them at night on our bed. Our 3 cats are sleeping, and the husband is awake and says he feels them walk on him. I think it's the neighbor's cats I used to take care of. They were black cats, and we were buddies. They'd purr when I visited, and I'd cuddle them. In my house as a kid, I would hear violins from the closet and see faces on the ceilings. My mom's boyfriend came over one day. He was native and very in tune with spirits. He came in, said he could sense my dad, take 2 more steps, and say something was evil. He refused to come in. He walked around to the backyard. My house now, I've woken up feeling someone sitting at the foot of my bed. There will even be an indent in the mattress. I have also heard giggling in my basement. My boyfriend has a little blonde boy who only visits us when his parents are on vacation. He just chills on the dining table while we get midnight snacks or water. We can't look directly at him, and he sits in the corner of our eye. All he really does is freak out my boyfriend's bird, but she's a bitch, so I get it. He's like 5 feet 7 inches, Polish or Ukrainian looking and always sad. We've named him a boy in Russian, but he's Chicky for short. My family and I were spending the summer in Mexico back in like 2006 or something. I was around 10 years old. We were staying at my grandma's house, and I had to share a room with my parents. Well, I woke up one night, and I had to use the restroom, so I forced myself out of bed and went across the courtyard of the house. The courtyard was dimly lit by a lone light bulb. I made it across and did my business. I walked out, and I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I did a full 180 and in front of me was a little girl, pale as hell, in a white gown, green eyes, brunette hair and a glowing aura. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. I finally broke her gaze and ran back to the bedroom, crying hysterically. I told my parents what I saw, and they told me to shut up and go back to bed. When I was in my early 20s, I lived in Kansas. The duplex used to be old army barracks. Sometimes when I was in bed, the stereo or the TV would turn on. Nobody else was around, and the only cat I had was always in bed with me. It didn't happen on a regular basis and never during the day. I was not scared, and figured it was someone who wanted to relax and unwind. Sometimes, I would leave the music on for them and just turn it down, so I could sleep. I was at work. It was in a group home, 10 p.m. at night. I was pulling a 16-hour shift, so after the clients, we support went to bed, I had kicked back, took my shoes off, and started watching YouTube. Now sometimes, managers popped in without warning to make sure we were doing our job, not abusing clients. They've occasionally caught staff in the act, etc. Everyone's in bed, my female coworker is in the other room watching TV, I'm chilling wide awake and sober 100% with myself. This young man in his 20s, well-groomed dark brown hair, thin, effeminate, trots down the stairs. I see him having thought he was a pop-up house manager checking on everything. He crosses past the room I am in. It doesn't have a door, it's like a lounging spot. He says to me, "Hello," then goes down the hallway. I'm thinking, oh shit, I was caught. I scramble to put my shoes on and get up. This dude was gone for a while. I thought he went into a client's room. There's no back door back there either. I asked my coworker where he went. She didn't see him. We searched for this guy, and he was gone. So, a ghostly apparition decided to say hello to me, then went down a hallway at my work like it was a typical Tuesday. He might have sensed I was leaving the company because of its negative toxic environment and wanted to say goodbye before I did. So, that was nice. I felt nothing but love coming from them, the spirits. I have a theory time doesn't work the same way on the other side. I had the same dream for 5 days straight. It was me in a dining room with a table full of food, and a man in a black leather overcoat and long silver hair, and yellow eyes was eating at the table. He stared at me for 2 seconds and then continued eating. On the 5th day of this, I decided to experiment. I sat down at the table with him. He looked at me and said, "Expect the worst from tomorrow." The next day this whole quarantine started. Not mine but my mom, who gets all the good stories. So, when I was 10 and asleep, my mom and dad were watching TV when our cat started meowing at nothing. My mom looked over and said dead serious, "Ghost, this is not your house anymore. Get out. I own this place. Please leave." After that, my cat looked at my mom, almost confirming the ghost was gone. Also, my mom has like 80 other stories, like the crazy ghost that followed her from Quebec to Sweden. In the month before my granddad passed away earlier this year, he and my grandmother had been seeing full-body apparitions around their home, mainly at night. She even described one as wearing 50s-era clothing. 2 weeks after he passed, I spent the night over. It was just after 11 p.m. My grandmother and I were asleep when we heard a woman say what sounded to us like Bud, my granddad's nickname, or Barb, my grandmother's shortened name only used by her friends or adult family. I would have brushed this off as my grandmother until I called out for her, and she asked me if I had heard it too. A couple days later, she saw her mother, who passed on my first birthday of all days, aged 103, standing at the foot of her bed. She's had only one other encounter since, but it's almost quieted down since his passing. A couple years ago, I was spending the night at my parents' house and was sleeping in my childhood room. That morning I woke up to see a tall shadowy figure standing in front of my dresser. My first thought was that there was someone in the room. My second thought was to not let the intruder know I was awake, so I stayed still and tried to keep my breathing steady, even though I was terrified. So, I lay there for about a minute, watching this shadow figure look at the things on my dresser. It didn't touch anything, just looked. Then I blinked, and the figure faded into nothing. When I just moved out of my parents' house, I lived in a house with 5 bedrooms total, 3 upstairs and 2 downstairs. For about 2 weeks, my friend and I lived there alone until other 3 people moved in. For the first week, we both would get woken up at about 2 or 3 a.m. by the sound of someone waking up and down the stairs. I've had strange occurrences happen since I was a kid. I'm 30 years old, and 2 days ago, a couple of my siblings and I were sitting in my living room watching TV when we heard what we thought was shampoos, bottles, etc., fall in one of my restrooms. No one was in the restroom for hours before. We all stared at each other and built up the courage to check it out. Sure enough, all the shampoos and body washes in both restrooms were all in the middle of both bathtubs. We were speechless. But again, that was just 2 days ago. I can write up a book about my experiences. I have a few, but I will share my own. So, I was just about to go to sleep. I was 8 or 9, and I couldn't sleep. As I was tossing and turning, my door opened. I looked over to see who it was, but I couldn't see their face. I was so scared because I could not recognize who it was. The being walked over to my bed and just stared at me. It was only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. Then suddenly, they vanished. There was the moonlight that let me see a little. It was safe to say I couldn't sleep that night. Not sure if sleep paralysis counts, but this is my story. I was around 12 at the time and did not believe in ghosts. I was a really huge night owl and would always sleep to midnight, or 1 a.m. So, there I was watching YouTube in my bed. That was when I passed out. It was probably 3 hours later when I woke up. I could not move. At first, I was really confused, but then was losing my shit when I realized I could see behind my fucking head. 5 minutes past of silence passed by, when I realized something was walking through the fucking door. I quickly realized I was in sleep paralysis, and that was a demon. Now, this dude looked like SCP-096, except it had no teeth, it was completely black, and its mouth was already open. It started walking towards me at a slow pace with its hand behind its back, making no sound. Meanwhile, I'm screaming like Tom from Tom and Jerry and freaking out. When it got to my bed, it started doing these exercise lunges right at me, trying to startle me, and it was working because whenever it does it, its face would be like 3 inches in front of my face. I had a panic attack at that time when I realized I saw my finger move. That was when I woke up in a cold sweat. That was 2 years ago, and I still think about it to this day. About a year ago, my best friend was sleeping over at my house. We were sleeping, and I slightly woke up and felt the bed shaking while half asleep. I tell myself it was probably just a snow clearer since I live in Canada, and it was winter. So, try to fall back asleep. Not even 30 seconds later, the bed shakes again but slightly more aggressively, so I jump out of bed because I'm spooked, and I check to see if my whole room is shaking or if it was just the bed. If it's a snow clearer, my whole room shakes. Spoiler alert, it was just the bed. My best friend wakes up and is like, "What the fuck are you doing?" I ask her if she felt the bed shaking, and she says no. After going back to sleep, I wake up again to something grabbing my arm. I sit up terrified and wake my best friend up and tell her what happened. At this point, she is also spooked. She sits with me, we turn the lights on, and we start talking about what the fuck happened. Then we hear a cat screaming super loudly like it was being skinned alive. Me thinking it was my cat getting killed by a demon or something, I am ready to go beat his ass and save my baby. I grab a fake wooden gun that is pretty heavy and get ready to swing it at whatever is in my house. I check to see if my sister is in her room. She is. The cat is sleeping on her bed. I end up checking the kitchen and then the living room. I got mentally ready to go to the basement, and then I almost hit my dad, who was wondering why I was up. I ended up going back to my room, and my best friend and I fell back asleep face to face because we were scared. When I was young, I lived in a haunted house. Everyone living in it except for my father was certain it was haunted. Unfortunately, my mom passed when I was 5 years old. My father worked lots of hours, and my sisters were out on their own, making their way through their adult lives. This left me alone a lot. My family adopted a Belgian Malinois named Heidi. At first, we had a tumultuous relationship. She'd follow me around growling. After a couple of weeks, we were inseparable. She seemed to feel she needed to protect me, and stayed by my side all the time. Well, of course, she eventually had to be put down. My father shot her in our backyard and buried her behind the barn. After that, I would constantly see a black shepherd-sized shadow darting in and out of the front and back doors of the house. My sister lived next door. I would sometimes see the shadow in her yard, where Heidi often visited. One time I saw the shadow 4 houses down the street at my sister's best friend. I really felt like it was the ghost of Heidi looking out for me, especially around that evil house. We moved to a new house, and I never saw her again. I had many ghost encounters. I can name a few of them. I heard a woman tell me to hide and then tell me about a week later that they are coming. I don't know what she warned me about, but I have to find out. A little girl told me to help her. This last one I don't remember, but I was told that when I was around 6, I asked, "Who's the man in the bathroom?" I have a nice ghost who visits me only when I fall asleep in front of the fire. I can't tell if it's male or female, but it has the slightest bit of garlic breath. I call them the garlic ghost. The garlic ghost puts their feet on either side of my head on the pillow, and just stands there watching me sleep. It's like a ghost that is so dead. All that's left is a human spirit and no gender. GG is fascinating, and I can tell they love me. Mine happened when I was 7 years old. I can still perfectly recall every detail. Something woke me up in the middle of the night. I remember not being startled or afraid, but I went from a deep sleep to totally conscious. I looked out from my bed, and framed in my doorway, I saw what looked to be a kneeling woman. She looked white and translucent, and as though she were kneeling in prayer. She was wearing what I associated to be First Communion clothes, because I was going through catechism for my First Communion at the time, but this meant she was wearing a white dress and veil. It looked as though her veil and sleeves were blowing in a breeze, even though my room was still. I wasn't afraid, but I pulled the comforter over my head and went back to sleep. The next morning, I described this to my mom, and she got very upset, which was unlike her. She told me, "Don't lie. Are you lying? It's not good to lie." She eventually believed me. She was so upset because she had already spoken to my aunt that morning. My aunt told her about how my cousin screamed in the night and woke everyone up, describing exactly what I had seen. We found out later that our great aunt had passed away that very night. I think she was making the rounds to say a little prayer for her family members on her way out. Not really a ghost story, but odd nonetheless. A few years ago, I had this small apartment. We call it a bedsit. It's literally just a room that is my bedroom, lounge, and kitchen. Anyway, every day when I would come home from work, I could never ever find my TV remote. I would spend 10 to 20 minutes searching for the damn thing every night, and when I eventually found it, it would be in the most random unexplained place ever. Never inside something I don't recall, but always under something or stuffed behind something, like an oven. This happened the whole time I lived there, maybe about a year. Just strange and unexplained. No one else had a key to the apartment bar, the landlord and me, and it wasn't him. And no, I wasn't losing the plot. True story. When I was about 5 or 6. I remember waking up in the middle of the night in my bedroom with my twin brother. We shared a room at the time. Our blinds were closed, lights were off, and the door was shut. I got this intense feeling that something was not right, and someone or something was staring at me. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I looked up at my ceiling and saw this huge white circle, as if someone were shining a flashlight straight up, and red eye? In the middle. I can't remember if there was a face or anything, but at that point, I was crying hysterically and calling for my parents. The scariest thing was when my mom burst through the door and actually saw what I saw. She shouted, "Get away from my babies." And I can never forget the sound I heard as it vanished into thin air. It was like a high-pitched howl that gave you chills down your spine. To this day, it still gives me chills when I think about it. I especially hate being home alone at night. My old rental house in Baton Rouge in college. Super old house with old wood floors on stilts. The kitchen and laundry room didn't have AC vents installed. They were only in the living room and bedrooms. Pots and pans we hung from hooks we installed on a board that was nailed to the wall in the kitchen. They would bang, and when we would go look, they'd be just swinging slightly. The windows were painted shut and doors locked, so we never figured that one out. My buddy lived in the apartment complex behind the house and was dog sitting his cousin's German Shepherd. He was never a dog person and had a tiny apartment, so I offered to take the dog. I fed it on time and took him to the dog park every single day before or after work, restaurant, so sometimes early, sometimes evening hours. He got super protective and attached to me and never left my side. One night, he stood up from his spot. He laid next to me in the living room and started growling at my roommate's room. He was back home in Texas, and the third roommate had moved out. The room he was growling at had its own door to the outside, so I thought maybe he's home early. The dog starts really growling like crazy hair, standing up snarling. I call out to my roommate, asking if anybody is there. The dog is really going crazy. I hear footsteps on the wood floor. I grab the bat by the couch and approach the room. Dog by my side heeling. I open the door and turn on the light. Nobody there. The dog next to me snarling. The dog starts barking viscously at the corner of the room where my roommate's desk is. Maglite flashlight standing upright on the light side on the desk falls over and rolls off the desk. Immediately put the leash on the dog and left for the night. I tried my best to sleep at my girlfriend's place after I had to give the dog up. When my buddy's cousin returned, she was furious because the dog wouldn't come to her and still always followed me when I came over. She never took him outside and fed him leftovers and extra bologna she had in the fridge. I took care of him. So, of course, that happened. This happened about 20 years ago to my younger brother. I called him the day after a hurricane had struck our area and had affected his location more so than mine. I asked if he and his family were okay and if they needed anything. He reported that they were fine, and there was no damage to the house. I could hear talking and other noises in the background, so I asked him where he was at. He said he was at the store buying a new American flag for our father. I asked him what happened to his flag, that he needed a new one, and he told me he didn't know, but that he had a dream the previous night in which he was instructed to get him a new flag. This piqued my interest, so I asked about the dream. He said he was dreaming about driving a convertible down a freeway and came upon a hitchhiker. The next thing he knew, the hitchhiker was seated next to him in the car. The hitchhiker kept calling him Mike and was very happy and excited to see him. My brother's name is not Mike, which he told the hitchhiker, but our father goes by his middle name of Michael and is usually referred to as Mike. This surprised the hitchhiker, and he said to my brother, "You look just like your father when he was your age. He needs a new flag, and tell him Harry said hi." When he woke up, he vividly remembered the dream, as if it was real. We've all dreams like that, the ones you remember throughout the day and can't shake them out of your head. So, he decided to go get a flag and take it to our father just to test the dream. I told him to call me afterwards and let me know how that went. When he called, I eagerly picked up the phone to hear what had happened. He told me he did as the man in the dream said and gave the flag to our father and told him that Harry said hi. He said our father turned white as a ghost and told him that his flag was damaged in the hurricane. Not only that, but he showed him a black and white picture from an old photo album of a young man. My brother immediately identified him as the man in the dream. Harry was our father's best friend from childhood. Both joined the armed services at the start of the Vietnam War, but Harry was killed. His name is etched into the wall at the memorial in D.C. I don't know what to make of these events except that there seem to be limited to what science can tell us at our current state of understanding, and maybe we never really cease to exist. To start this off, I have a degree in psychology and am totally aware of what the mind can do. I used to live in an extremely old house. I'm talking it was approaching 200 years old. During those times, there were no such things as funeral homes. The wakes would be held in the passing one's home. Also, during the early times of my home, soldiers of the Civil War could commandeer any person's home and use it as shelter. Basically, there was a bunch of death in my house. So, first, of two things, I was chilling in my renovated attic, playing video games. All of a sudden, in my peripheral, I see this misty white figure, maybe 7 feet tall, walk from my sister's room into mine. My house was symmetrical. I look and barely catch its white misty coat flowing behind it. I'm like, alright. So that just happened. I think, well, this is an old ass house, weird shit happens. Then, I see it again, in my peripheral, a ghostly, white, misty figure move from my room back to my sister's. I thought, thank fuck that shit isn't staying in my room. I went to check it out and saw nothing. I rolled out and tried to take my mind off of the fact that I just saw a ghost by watching TV downstairs. Now, second thing. This is by a long shot the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I'm still in this old ass house, sleeping soundly. For some reason, I wake up in the middle of the night, maybe 3 or so. I have this strange urge to watch my door. I do so for maybe 3 to 4 minutes straight. Barely blinking. Then, after nothing happens, I chill out, and, after totally recognizing that I'm awake, I say to myself, I'm just freaking myself out. Then, I notice a face looking at me from the bottom corner of my bed. I look over to see the scariest, creepiest thing I could never have even imagined. It was this humanoid goblin thing that was, even in the dark, this greenish in color thing. It was staring at me with massive eyes and an even more massive grin. I locked eyes with it for maybe 5 to 6 seconds. I then proceeded to throw the covers over my face and stood completely still for around 15 minutes, which felt like 2 hours. I then very slowly pulled the covers down from in front of my face to see nothing. Ever since then, I jump, and I mean literally jump, away from my bed any time I had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. We moved out a year and a half ago, and I feel much safer now. I told the new homeowners that there were spirits in the house, they just brushed it off. They'll find out soon enough. Thanks to anyone that read this long as post. Spirits are real and don't take them for granted. Sometimes they can be maleficent. I had a girlfriend when I was about 19 whose family was from Wisconsin, but she lived in NY with me. She had told me stories about how she used to play with an Ouija board with her friend before she moved to NY. She told me that they had made contact with a spirit, and this spirit had told them that he watches her when she sleeps. One summer, I went back to Wisconsin with her to visit her family. They had already moved stuff in her old room, so we were staying in a converted garage that was acting as a storage space. We weren't married, so she stayed in bed, and I slept on the floor. We were there for about a week, and her family was very nice and welcoming to me, but it was a bit intimidating to be staying at my girlfriend's parents' house at that age. One night I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a man standing next to me, sort of looming over me, facing in my direction. Not a foot away from me. In shoes and long pants. I assumed it was her father and pretended I was asleep. I didn't want to make eye contact with him as it would have been super awkward. I closed my eyes and eventually fell back asleep. I woke up the next morning unsure of what I had seen. I asked my girlfriend if her father would ever come into her room at night, and she said no. I then noticed that her father slept in shorts, not pants. I don't know what I saw. It's been so many years now I can barely even remember the actual event, rather I feel like I just remember the memories. To this day, I would tell anyone I don't believe in ghosts, and I don't, but I cannot explain who that man was or what I saw.